exciting. My name is Amanda Litman. I'm one of the co-founders and co-executive directors of Run for Something and Run for Something Action Fund. And I am thrilled to be part of the amazing coalition hosting today's virtual summit. Welcome, whether you are working or running for state or local office, whether you're a Statehouse staffer, you're working in a city council, you're considering going involved with school boards, whatever role you have to play in this ecosystem, we are so glad you're here and that you're fired up for what is an incredible lineup of conversations, of panels, of experts, of inspiring leaders who are going to talk about how state and local government can actually get shit done, which is such a refreshing change of pace, especially when we're looking at the news out of Washington. So welcome to today's summit. I don't need to tell you why this work matters. You get it. You are on the ground working with these candidates, being an elected official yourself, working in these state capitals. You understand that as we look forward, and true looking back as well, but especially as we look forward, the most meaningful progress that we are going to get on the issues that we care about is going to come from state and local government. We are going to be on the front lines of defense and offense when it comes to protecting access to abortion, when it comes to protecting people's right to vote, when it comes to things like, unfortunately, LGBT equality, when it comes to things like school curriculums. The folks who are working on the ground to pass ballot initiatives, which I know we're going to talk about in some of these panels later today, who are writing new state laws to find creative ways to bring about criminal justice reform, who are thinking about how we can really make public safety a prominent part of the conversation. You're the ones that are doing it. You're doing the work. You understand why this matters, and we are so glad to have you here. I am thrilled to be able to welcome one of our other incredible leaders whose organization is helping co-sponsor this event, Chris Melody Fields Figueredo, who is the executive director of the Ballot Initiative Strategy Center. We are thrilled to be working in partnership with them as well as with the Democracy Policy Network. Chris, over to you.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for that kind introduction. And yeah, let's celebrate just being here. It has been an incredibly difficult 2.5 years. The last month alone has been like one that is making it really difficult for all of us to be present. So the fact that you are here, that's an accomplishment, and the work that you are doing matters. So yes, I'm Chris Melody Fields Figueredo. I'm the executive director of the Ballot Initiative Strategy Center and BISC Foundation. And we're so glad to be in partnership with Amanda and Pete, Run for Something and Democracy Policy Network, to have this really critically important conversation about our democracy. Like, there is no more important conversation to have right now about our democracy and everything that it takes to have something that represents all of us. Because let's be honest, that hasn't been the reality for the majority of the folks in this country. I'm a queer Latina immigrant, and I know when this democracy was originally designed, it didn't include me, but that doesn't mean that I don't fight for it every single day. So, it is so incredibly important for us to really, yes, address these really complicated issues that are in front of us, and ballot measures is one of the tools that we have in front of us that can work with state and local government, that works with advocates on the ground, that really has the opportunity to make really bold progressive change. But that only happens if we center the people that are most impacted, and if equity is what is critically important for us to move forward. And it can be a tool for change. We believe that it can be a tool for liberation, but it's not complete if we don't also have our state and local governments, if we don't have folks working in the field, if we don't, have folks working in institutions. Like, all of this really, really, really matters. And I'm super excited for all of you because you get to hear from some of our amazing biscuits. Marcia Donay, who will talk about how ballot measures can be a tool for progressive change, and Kintaya and Gina, who will talk about what's really real right now, is direct democracy is under attack. And that's because of the amazing work that all of y'all have been doing to make progressive change. Like, we just had historical signature gathering in states like Michigan, the most signatures gathered for not just a ballot measure, but for reproductive freedom in the state. Like, we just have so many things to be excited for, and you're going to get to talk about that today. So we're so excited to be a part of this conversation, so excited to learn from all of you, and I'll turn it over to Pete.
Thank you so much, Chris and BISC. Thank you, Amanda, and Run for Something Action Fund. I'm Pete Davis, Director of the Democracy Policy Network, or DPN for short. We work to raise up ideas for deepening democracy, and today is such a great example of raising up ideas and strategies for deepening democracy. As Chris and Amanda said, we have amazing panels today. We got policy panels on green homes and tackling monopoly power and social housing and non-carceral first responders and much, much more. We got strategy panels on messaging and winning and getting ideas on the ballot, like Chris talked about, and banding together as candidates and legislators. We also have almost 1,000 state leaders, staffers, and advocates from 50 states and DC and Puerto Rico in the audience today who have RSVP'd. It's the biggest gathering of state policy and strategy for deepening democracy this year. So glad to have you all here. And we see this all part, and Chris and Amanda spoke to this, of a shared project of deepening American democracy in the broadest sense of the term, not just voting, but every way you can extend more power to more people in more ways. Every way we can make it easier for people to co-create our shared world, to have a voice in the forces that govern our lives. This is a group today who believes that freedom is not just liberty from power and government, but participation in power and government. And that's what we're fighting for here today. And, there's a lot of folks who believe, there's no hope for American democracy. But what continues to give me hope, and what we're trying to highlight here today, is that the deeper democracy we pine for, the nation we dream of, already exists today in the present, in piecemeal, scattered in various experiments and rebellions and countercultures and ballot initiatives and new folks running for office and alternative policies in states and cities across the country. The task is to foster these alternatives, grow them, and spread them. And that's what we're trying to celebrate here today, those policies, those strategies, those champions of those policies and strategies. And I hope you come away from this event with inspiration and useful takeaways to continue this movement for American democracy in the states. I have been tasked with the logistics czar listing out. So I'm going to have to do the boring stuff of the intro, which is a few logistics notes. One is we are in this system called Hopin. It is trying to, resemble a real physical conference. So you'll notice in the left bar how to navigate. Most of the time that will involve sessions. There are 2 sessions that are going to be going on at each time. Every 30 minutes, they'll switch to another 2 sessions. You click on which session you want to go to, and you get where you need to go. And don't worry, there's video of the session you missed that will be posted later. There's the main stage you can click in the left that you come back to at the end. There's a networking button, which at different times throughout the schedule, you can click in. It'll randomly pair you with someone of the same category as you, legislators with legislators, staffers with staffers, and so on. And you can get to know someone for 5 minutes. And within each session, there's a chat and a full event chat as well for, getting across the whole conference. And there is closed captioning in the additional info boxes for every session. A huge special thanks today to Jeff Bai and Mike Sadler for helping out so much and putting this together. A huge, huge thanks to Tyler Hall and Mike Draskovich for leading on this summit, and everyone at the teams at Run for Something Action Fund and BISC for helping bring together policy and strategy in such a powerful way. One more reminder, it's not too late to invite people. If you text your friends right now and tell them to come to statehousefutures.org and tell them what they're going to be missing out on if they don't come join us. And that's all the logistics. So without further ado, we're going to throw it to our 2 keynote speakers who are going to speak. And then we're going to start our first sessions at 1:30 after they speak. So we begin with the wonderful Greg Jackson. He is a community organizer, campaign strategist, and advocate with the Community Justice Action Fund, an organization committed to reducing gun violence by empowering those most impacted by violence to lead, organize, advocate and create solutions in our country. This is such a timely problem in our country, such an important problem that needs to be solved. And Greg Jackson is one of those leading the way. So over to you, Greg, to speak to our audience here at Statehouse Futures.
All right. Thanks, Pete, and greetings to everybody in Zoom land or hop-in land, if you will. As Pete said, I'm Greg Jackson, the Executive Director for Community Justice Action Fund. But just a little bit about me, I learned firsthand that sometimes tough things in life don't happen to you, they happen for you. Like so many others on this call and across the country, I was someone who grew up passionate about making the world a better place, passionate about achieving change in my own community, was a political nerd, if you will, studied politics in college. I was one of the few viewers that actually watched C-SPAN every day. And despite all of my passions and excitement around this issue, or around multiple issues in politics in general, it really took a tough moment for me to really find my voice and figure out the best way for me to help fight for change. In April of 2013, I was working for an issue organizing entity, Organizing for Action, but I also was hosting a dinner for my family friends, and we all came together. Dinner was amazing. We had Moroccan food. We went out to party afterwards. And on the walk home, we literally took the wrong turn, and two individuals were arguing. That argument turned into gunfire, and then I was shot. The bullet that hit me hit two arteries, and so I nearly bled to death. And despite that near-death experience, a few things that stood out to me were frankly more traumatic than being shot itself. One was when I arrived at the hospital, I wasn't met with nurses or doctors or surgeons. I was met with investigators that questioned me and interrogated me about my whereabouts, what I was doing with the conflict. Was I selling drugs? Did I throw the gun away? And really saw me as a criminal first and a patient second, without any real intel to think that way. And after navigating through three investigators, I was able to get to my surgeon, and he shared I only had about 26 minutes to live based on blood loss. And so I was rushed into surgery, luckily survived. And when I came out of surgery, I did what I always do. I turned on the news to look at what's going on in the political world. And I saw that the background check vote had failed in the Senate. And this was 4 days before I got gotten shot. And I sat there and watched elected officials and leaders and advocates from all over the country, a lot of which I admired, frankly, give excuses of why they couldn't take action and why they couldn't bring about change on this issue. And so that lit a real fire in me that this is not going to change if I stand back and watch. And also that no matter how much I know, no matter how much I do, in the light of our society, I still will be seen as a criminal first, as a Black man in America. And my life may not matter as much as the next man unless I do something to change it. In America, gun violence is now the #1 cause of death for all youth, surpassing car accidents and even the opioid crisis and COVID-19. But it's also the #1 cause of premature death for Black men under the age of 44. #2 cause of death for younger Black women and Latino men. And despite those really stark stats, the news has shown us a different picture. It shows that gun violence is here at every turn. But it also only shows the stories and the human side of mass shootings and as violence shows up in places where it shouldn't happen. Right now, Black and brown communities make up the majority of lives that are being lost, especially from homicide and interpersonal violence. But we saw quickly, especially me in my recovery, that the policymakers, the advocates, and the news didn't reflect the crisis that was happening. And in turn, the solutions didn't reflect that. And so in 2015, our organization, Community Justice, was founded in the aftermath of the shooting of Charleston. Our founder at the time, she was in Charleston, South Carolina, and saw firsthand there how those communities were being perceived different, supported different, and frankly, the solutions that came out of that were very, very different. And so she started Community Justice really to focus on addressing gun violence by centering those who have been directly impacted, and not just academics, experts, quote unquote, or politicians who weren't connected with the communities that were suffering most. And since then, we've learned a lot. Frankly, we learned how overwhelming this crisis is. Every year, over 100,000 people are shot or killed, and that number is actually a low estimate. We know that Black men make up 6% of the population, but over half of the homicides. We also learned that every year our economy loses $280 billion to gun violence. And then most recently, we've seen that there's been a drastic increase since the beginning of COVID. We've seen a 35% increase in homicides and 39% increase in the Black community. And what a lot of that has told us is that despite increases in law enforcement, increases in criminal legal justice sentencing, and cracking down on crime, we've seen that while crime overall may stay steady or may even decrease, gun violence has increased. And that really shows us one thing, that this is a public health crisis and not necessarily a crime crisis. And that stands true in the Black community. One major thing that we learned, and again, I learned firsthand, I want to share with you, is that 70% of homicides in the Black community are not connected to another felony crime. But yet, when we look at the policy, what we've seen is that the policy is purely focused on crime control and crime-focused strategies. And so we've been fighting aggressively every single day to push this and educate people on this being a public health crisis in need of a public health response. So what does that mean? That means that we focus on the people. We focus on treating those who have been directly impacted. We focus on supporting victims and those who are suffering most. And most importantly, we focus on therapeutic and health-based strategies to help those who are closest to the pain, that are closest to the violence, and closest to becoming either a future victim or, unfortunately, a future offender. At Community Justice, we've been fighting for these strategies for 6 years now, and we're pretty excited to share a few updates. Since our fight, when we originally started doing federal work, there was only $16 million for these types of strategies. And now we're looking at around $14 billion in federal funds that are being invested in these strategies. The American Rescue Plan that was rolled out to address COVID was one thing that was seen as just a health-based strategy and not thinking about how COVID was impacting other forms of our life. And so we worked with the Department of Treasury and Department of Education, and they rolled out guidance that said that COVID relief funds should also prioritize these types of strategies. So we've seen a tremendous level of progress at the federal level and the state level, investing in these community-led violence intervention and prevention strategies, and really pushing our government and leaders to take a public health approach to addressing violence. And we've seen tremendous results on top of that. Certain cities have reduced violence upwards of 60% in less than 5 years by just taking a public health comprehensive approach. And so I say all this to say, you can obviously follow us on social media and our website to learn more about our work and our approach to this. But I say all this to say that, for me, it started with just understanding the crisis, seeing how it's impacting me firsthand, seeing how it's impacting my peers and my fellow community leaders, and then really turning around and putting pressure on stakeholders in our communities to really start to center those who have been impacted just like me. And so I have 2 quick calls to action for you. One is to think about whatever issue that you're focusing on. Is it serving those who are most in need? And are you elevating their voices to be a part of the change? Because you never know how that one voice can help create a ripple that could create, in our situation, billions of resources to bring about change. And then 2, are you putting the pressure you need to make sure that your leaders are investing in strategies just as aggressively as they're changing policies and laws? So many of the problems in our communities across the country can be addressed with resources and investments, and not just more regulations and policy changes. And especially at the state and local level, there's so much power in budgets and advocacy. So my second call to action is to really push you to think about and put pressure on your stakeholders to think about that budget and how it can help save lives and impact others. Lastly, I'll just share that, I strongly believe that there is a way that we can end gun violence, but it has to start with a people-centered approach, and it has to be centered around those who have been most impacted to share the strategies that we know work. And if we do that, we can change things in this area. But frankly, we know that we can reverse this crisis once and for all. So I want to thank you all. Thank you to the Statehouse Futures family, everyone, for having me here for a short while, just to share a little bit about my story, a little bit about the work that we're doing, but most importantly, about a solution that we know is impactful, valuable, and we know is critical at this time to help us address one of the biggest public health crises that our country has ever seen. So thank you, and I will pass it back to Pete.
Thank you so much, Greg. So wonderful to have you here to kick us off on such an important issue and such an inspiring intervention in that issue. We move on to our second keynote speaker, Representative Anna Eskamani, a member of the Florida House of Representatives. Representative Eskamani was born and raised in Orlando and a daughter of immigrants. She overwhelmingly was elected to the Florida House in 2018 and won re-election in 2020. Since sending Anna to Tallahassee, she has demonstrated an ability to hold politicians accountable while still building consensus across divides. Representative Eskamani, so glad to have you here at Statehouse Futures. Over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Pete, for having me. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. And of course, to the amazing work of community justice. Y'all are such rock stars and they're inspired by your leadership every single day. And I just want to echo the comments around people-centered policies, centering our work on directly impacted people. And for those of us with our lived experiences, picking up the mantle and run for office ourselves is transformational to the makeup of our democratic structures and to the impact of our democratic systems. And again, my name is Anna V. Eskamani. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm so honored to be here in conversation with you and to also uplift just the important role that state leaders can play in concretely transforming narratives around issues we care about and also advancing those policies to end gun violence in America and end gun violence in our communities. This issue, like for everyone, is very personal for me as well. I grew up in Orlando as a daughter of working class immigrants. My parents came from two different parts of Iran, but met each other working at the same donut shop in Orlando. They left a country that has experienced a great deal of political upheaval to come find freedom and peace and joy in America. And we struggled every day to achieve that American dream. My parents worked multiple jobs to make ends meet. My mom actually passed away to cancer when I was 13 years old. And my dad became a single father raising 3 kids to help us get through high school and eventually to college. So every lived experience I have, every policy or issue I fight for comes from finding power in pain. And that's what Orlando had to do in 2016 when we had the Pulse nightclub tragedy. Pulse is in my district. Pulse was the first gay club that I ever went to. As someone who sees herself not just as an ally to the LGBTQ plus community, but as an accomplice, our gay clubs are spaces that are meant to be sanctuaries. And it's an environment where you can be yourself and really find community in that. And so when a gunman walked into Pulse and took from us 49 angels at the hands of an assault weapon, we knew in Central Florida that we couldn't just look at thoughts and prayers as being enough, that we needed to demand action. And at the time, I was not elected. I worked at Planned Parenthood as a reproductive rights advocate, which I still am today. But I began to see the intersections of all of our collective freedoms and liberties and understood quickly that my freedom is tied to your freedom. And if there is an act of injustice anywhere, then that impacts each and one of us. And we can't just sit back and pretend like issues of gun violence, even if they're targeting a specific community or more common in some neighborhoods and others, don't impact each one of us. And so we found power in pain in Orlando and organized around gun prevention, about gun safety. We founded coalition spaces. We launched campaigns centered on electing the best people who were going to take on the NRA, and elected our first ever openly LGBTQ plus Latino lawmaker into Florida House. My work husband, Representative Carlos Guillermo Smith. And in 2017, I started thinking about maybe I should run for office because I had an incumbent moderate Republican in my district who maybe wasn't the most extreme version of his party, but did absolutely nothing in the face of gun violence and in the face of a mass shooting that predominantly impacted people of color and LGBTQ plus folks. And for me, that was enough to say that our community deserved transformational leadership, and we need to elect people that are not worried about backlash from the NRA but are actually willing to bravely have these conversations. And as Greg just said, center the conversation on directly impacted people. And so I made the jump to run for office as a first-time candidate in 2018, flipping our seat from red to blue and championing these very important issues. And in the legislature, things are difficult. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I represent Central Florida, and Florida has been in the news a lot for having a very conservative governor, a majority Republican legislature, and even a Supreme Court that has changed dramatically in its makeup. And so what can we do as local elected officials to transform narratives and to advance policies on gun safety in America? First of all, personal storytelling is so important. Every day I wear my rainbow and my trans ribbons as actions of solidarity with the lives we lost at Pulse and with those who we lose every day to gun violence within marginalized communities. And I uplift the stories who were impacted by Pulse. The stories were impacted by Parkland. The experiences of those who lived through community gun violence, those who lost loved ones to suicide, those who advocate for safe storage, because the number of children in Florida who hurt themselves or hurt others accidentally by a gun that wasn't safely secured. So we have to uplift the stories so that we can push back against this narrative that gun safety is anti-freedom, that gun safety is oppositional to our American values. I would argue that having freedom means the freedom to live in an environment free of gun violence. And when we tell stories of those who have been so profoundly impacted by what has become an exploitation of the Second Amendment, then we're able to find common ground, even among gun owners who overwhelmingly agree that we need policies like background checks. We need to strengthen and expand red flag laws. We need to keep guns out of the hands of domestic abusers. We need gun storage. We need to ban assault weapons. These are policies that overwhelmingly majority of Americans side with us on, but we have to be brave enough to have the conversation and then brace ourselves for the backlash from those who not only resist change, but see change as impacting their profits. Because that's what it comes down to on multiple issues, but especially gun safety, is that you have major special interests who are worried about their bottom lines and not the health and well-being of this country. So we have to take back the narrative by sharing our own stories and leading with values. With that said, in states like Florida, we're not only playing defense, we're also being proactive. Now, we're fighting against policies like permitless carry and campus carry, while also filing proactive bills to shift the narrative. Every year, I file a gun safety legislation to keep guns out of the hands of domestic abusers. We co-sponsor bills on the issues that I just talked about because we have to offer our community not just things to oppose, but something to fight for. And then to that same note, using your bully pulpit however you can to center the conversation back on everyday people. And we have so many amazing coalition partners that we can work with to make that happen, whether it's community justice, March for Our Lives, Moms Demand Action, local-based coalition that are intersectional, our faith-based community members, our medical institutions, and some of the community-based interventions that they provide. And to not only build those coalitions around multiple impacted groups, but to also see how that connects to other policy debates. Mass incarceration is a major problem in Florida that locks people into poverty who then might turn to violence as a means of survival. And we can prevent that if we also reimagine what public safety looks like from not just gun safety policies, but also anti-poverty initiatives alongside healthcare access, mental health resources. So to also remember that all of these issues are intertwined and we have to work together to solve them, but putting yourself in a position of local leadership is a powerful opportunity to do that. And so thank you again so much for having me, and look forward to the rest of the convening, and thanks again to our organizers for having me.
Thank you so much, Representative Anna Eskamani of the Florida House of Representatives. Please follow her for more of this very, very important message. Thank you so much for kicking us off, you and Greg, with such an important message. Now we move to our first panel at 1:30. There are two options: running with values or ballot measures as a tool for change. You click sessions in the tab on the left and pick one of them. Do not worry if you can't choose. The other one will be on video and posted later. So go ahead, click session tab on the left, two panels to choose from. And we're so excited to kick off a couple of hours of policy and strategy coming your way. Thanks everyone for coming. We'll see you in the panel sessions.